going to reduce its distribution because it looks suspicious to us. Now, what looked suspicious about the story is that it was about Hunter Biden and it was bad. That's what looked suspicious, because the notion that it was completely unthinkable that a doof like Hunter Biden would have just left a laptop at a Delaware repair shop, that's not particularly unthinkable. But the entire media instead swiveled into action to declare that this was in fact Russian disinformation, because everything I don't like is Russian disinformation. Every single thing. When my scale tells me that I am 4 pounds more than I was just a couple of weeks ago, that is Russian disinformation. I don't know how they hacked my scale. I just know what I know. And that's precisely what happened with the Hunter Biden story. And so it was disappeared off Facebook. And if you posted it on Twitter, you were disappeared off Twitter. The New York Post account on Twitter was actually banned. It was closed down for like a month. It was suspended based on an overtly true story where there was no one even rebutting it. The Biden administration, the Biden campaign, Hunter, none of them actually even denied that the story was true.
All right. So right now, Ben Shapiro, he's declaring that Hunter Biden was a drug addict. He was a derelict. He does what drug addicts and derelicts do, right? And he's upset because when this story came out, that social media was taking stuff down. So apparently, Ben Shapiro is very against censorship. Again, remember these things. They're important. They're going to be important later. So Ben Shapiro is very against censorship, and he has some pretty strong statements about Hunter Biden and the laptop. And remember, the title of this video again was "The Laptop Was Real, and Everybody Lied About It."
They just kind of pretended that it was Russian disinformation. And the entire media swiveled into place because it was very, very important that Joe Biden win the election. And you wouldn't want 1 month out people to be talking about how Hunter Biden was stooping prostitutes and picking up giant bags of cash based on the fact that his last name was Biden. And you certainly wouldn't want anybody talking about the fact that Hunter Biden was chatting with his friends over in China about who the big guy was, and the big guy was going to have reserved capital and reserved percentage points in businesses. You wouldn't want anybody talking about that, so you just made the story go away. And so you saw...
I mean, come on, guys. It's kind of ironic, right? Because you wouldn't want... Again, we're not going to use code words, but, you wouldn't want certain things about Epstein coming out and who he was working for and who he was affiliated with and what they were or were not doing. You wouldn't want that, right? And Ben Shapiro's against censorship. So if he thinks that social media should be allowing everybody to, post the news, especially when people aren't disputing it, how come he didn't have the same energy when TikTok was just shutting everything down? You couldn't even say Epstein's name in a DM. In a DM. I stopped using TikTok for this reason. Because my account started getting restricted and videos taken down. They threatened to ban me. I had all these strikes. But Ben Shapiro did not care about that, did not speak up about that. He wasn't Ben Shapiro wasn't against censorship when it came to Epstein or when it came to Gaza. But, oh my God, Hunter Biden's laptop. Free speech, everybody. Free speech in America.
Establishment media personalities, one after another, come out and say that the story was just fake. It was made up by the Russians. MSNBC executive producer Kyle Griffin, who's a wild leftist, he tweeted, "The Trump campaign claims Facebook is censoring journalism because Facebook plans to limit the spread of the New York Post report. That is not censorship. Facebook is under no obligation to allow a disputed report that appears to contain disinformation to spread on their platform." Now remember, this entire media apparatus has spent 4 years promoting the lie that Donald Trump was in fact a tool of the Russians and that the Steele dossier, which it turns out was just a bevy of garbage, was actually maybe true. We don't know. It's disputed. We don't know, but it's newsworthy, so we have to report it. You have the managing editor of truthaurfiction.com, some of our trusted fact checkers, tweeting out, "The great thing about this is that it's very easy to see who is committed to pushing known Kremlin disinformation." You had Ben Rhodes, former Obama official, tweeting out, "The right to spread false Russian disinformation about American political leaders on social media platforms is not the hill I would choose to die on." You had Brian Stelter putting out entire stories about how this was all Russian disinformation targeting Biden. You had CNN's Wolf Blitzer tweeting out, "We do know it's a very active Russian campaign, and that's according to the U.S. intelligence community." Ooh. Jim Sciutto of CNN, he said, "This is most likely Russian propaganda." You'll recall that there was an entire letter in Politico from 50 former intelligence officials, which, by the way, tells you why we don't trust our intelligence apparatus anymore, because it turns out that all of the people in our intelligence apparatus, or at least a huge chunk of them, are just mental idiots. I mean, it's amazing.
Wait. What did he just say? Hold on. We got to bring this back, because I think this is going to be very important for a little later.
Go. From 50 former intelligence officials, which, by the way, tells you why we don't trust our intelligence apparatus anymore.
So now he's saying that they got information from 50 intelligence agents. 50 intelligence agents. And remember the title of the video. Everybody lied. He made it the title of the video. And wait, what does this say about our intelligence apparatus, Ben?
Because it turns out that all of the people in our intelligence apparatus, or at least a huge chunk of them, are just mental idiots. I mean, it's amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing that Ben Shapiro is sitting here saying, in a video titled, "They All Lied About Hunter Biden's Laptop," is taking quotes from 50 intelligence agents. And he's sitting here laughing, giggling like a little idiot, saying, "What does this tell us? Our entire intelligence apparatus is a bunch of idiots." Really? All right, now let's switch it up. Let's switch it up and let's see what's changed. What has changed in 4 years besides Ben Shapiro's eyebrows? Hold on. Let me make sure I got the timestamp. Actually, you know what? We're not done. There's another part of this that I got to play. Hold on. I almost forgot. We're almost there. I got to give you guys a little suspense. I think you already have an idea where this is going too. And if you're excited now, just wait, because like I said, I started at 7 o'clock for a reason, and it is going to be a very, very long night.
United States.
That was not the question. You may have noticed. And then I'm just going to go to this.
We don't even need to get the question.
Isn't it fun that we are supposed to believe that all of the mechanisms of electoral integrity are on the up and up when it comes to the information that we are passed? It's always seemed to me that the argument that the 2020 election was rigged by voting fraud, for example, is overrated, that the evidence that this election was shifted by somebody stuffing the ballot box was not true. However, if you're going to say the election was rigged, it was rigged by a media that deliberately obfuscated and openly lied in order to suppress information about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, for example.
Okay, so now Ben Shapiro is accusing the media of basically rigging the election by spreading misinformation, and social media of censoring what he calls the truth. Guys, put a 1 in the chat if you're with me, if we're keeping up. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all understand what's going to happen tonight. Because Ben Shapiro's credibility is about to get nuked off of this planet forever. Forever. We're going to have half the freaking world ready to get their news from Blake Bednar's before anybody watches Ben Shapiro again after tonight.
That deliberately refused to ask Joe Biden any tough questions and allowed him to hide in the basement for months at a time. And then are we really surprised that this administration is a bleep show? It was never held to account. And here's the thing. People in the media tend to think that when they go soft on their own candidates, this is good for their candidates. In reality, all that ends up happening is that reality clocks the administration directly in the face. So instead of asking Joe Biden any tough questions about his foreign policy or his ideas or his background or his relationships or anything, they hated Trump so much that they just decided to basically lie about everything and cover everything up. And in the case of social media, basically ban true stories in order to get Joe Biden elected. Then he got elected, and it turns out he's an unbelievably crappy president. So when you seek help from somebody like Jen Psaki, you're not always going to get the best service or the best.
Guys, we're all on the same page, right? I don't got to repeat myself again, right? All right, let's move forward. Oh, man, look at those eyebrows. Look at his face. He looks like got some Botox going on. And again, guys, I just want to make it clear, okay? Now, I am saying that Ben Shapiro is full of shit, but I'm not accusing him of a crime. I'm not accusing anybody of a crime. And I'm not accusing Ben Shapiro of being a Mossad agent or asset or any of that. I'm not. I'm just not going to do it. No matter what we see, no matter what we hear, I'm not going to make that accusation. So I want to make it clear for the transcript, okay? This is an objective analysis. I take my work very serious.
Very famous, very wealthy, very powerful men, right? That was the story that we were all...
Oh, hold on. Now, this video, all right, you're not going to see it, but this one is called The Real, and real is in capital letters. The Real Jeffrey Epstein Story. Okay? Now, remember this. And now, I actually found this out recently from doing this deep, research and finding all these clips, getting everything together, is that Ben Shapiro likes to use that a lot. It's always like the real story, the debunked conspiracy theory, the truth. Like he speaks in all these ultimates. He's always going to give you, and he kind of gaslights the hell out of you. It's like, of course this is real. Of course I'm telling you the truth. And if you don't believe it, you have to be an idiot or you're not credible. Like that's like his attitude. He's like very smug about it in that sense. But
sort of brought up on over the past few years. And so let me say right at the outset, what is the real story about Jeffrey Epstein? I don't know the answer. You don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer. All I know is the publicly available information from court documents and from public disclosures and from various allegations made by various parties. That's all I know, and that's all anybody knows, except for members of the DOJ and FBI who have access to all sorts of information that you and I do not know. And so I will say right at the outset that when you look at the number of people inside DOJ and FBI who have now come out behind this memo, they have information I do not have. And so you now have a choice. You can either believe that these people are motivated by a desire to cover something up, that the conspiracy goes even higher than we thought, or you can believe that the people who are in a position of power, in a position to know, the people with access to data that I don't have, you don't have, no one has, that those people actually are telling the truth based on their legally best information. Right? That's your choice. There is no third choice. Right? Either all of...
But wait, Ben, what do you believe? What do you believe? Because I just saw a clip when they're talking about Hunter Biden's laptop that you don't believe any of them. The title of the video was Everybody Lied. You had statements from 50 agents, and you're laughing like this whole apparatus, they're all liars. All 50 of them, all these agents in the DOJ and intelligence. They're all lying. Of course, he was a drug addict. He was this. Now, listen, there's not too much. He's right about one thing. We don't know exactly what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for saying that he was a derelict. At the very least. At the very least. Guys, put a 1 in the chat if you think Jeffrey Epstein was a derelict. I think I can get away with saying that much. And I don't care if they suppress this video for this, for saying his name, like he's the freaking boogeyman. You got to be careful. It's like Candyman. Like you say his name or he's going to pop up like Beetlejuice. And the freaking, the YouTube police are going to come and shut you down. Shout out to Nate. Like, that's screwed up what they did. Who knows? Maybe with what else is going on in the real world, they're not going to care too much about me covering this. Maybe I'll slip through the cracks, they're probably really disappointed because I heard those UFO files came out. So they probably expect everybody to talk about that. But I'm going to make it my mission that at least for tonight, that we're going to talk about Ben Shapiro and Jeffrey Epstein and how and why I am not accusing Ben Shapiro of being a part of Mossad. I'm just not going to do it.
All of those people are personally involved in the cover-up. They know better and they are lying to you. Or they're telling you the truth. And since I have no reason to believe that Dan Bongino, for example, or Kash Patel at the FBI, or Donald Trump, or J.D. Vance, or any of the other people in the administration who have spoken about this before and now are saying that Epstein killed himself and that there is no Epstein list, I don't have any reason to believe those people are lying to me and they have better information than I do. All I can do, rationally speaking, from my own perspective, is say that I believe them. Now, could evidence emerge that completely contradicts all of that and it turns out they were part of a conspiracy? Sure, that could happen. And when that happens...
Guys, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. Some evidence is about to start emerging tonight. Some evidence is going to emerge. And some of that evidence, again, it comes down to pattern recognition and just common denominators and who was where, with who else, when, and what were they doing, who were they doing it with, how were they affiliated, what are their connections. And maybe, just maybe, our buddy Ben Eyebrows here may have a couple of conflicts of interest. He might. Ben Shapiro might have a couple of reasons why he doesn't want the truth about Epstein coming out. That, again, I will make clear, have nothing to do with him committing anything. He's not. Like, just spoiler alert, there's not going to be any pictures of, like, Ben, doing anything other than what this douchebag usually does. But there is some stuff that's going to back up that big butt that I was talking about before.
Happens, I will change my opinion. But all of this broke out into the open yesterday when, after this DOJ FBI memo went out, President Trump was asked during a cabinet meeting about the Jeffrey Epstein case. And he got rather irked because, in his view, this thing has been ongoing since 2019. It is now 2025. There's a lot going on in his administration. In President Trump's view, the American people have a lot of priorities, and the Epstein-Maxwell case is low on the priority list. Now, it is obviously true that for a huge number of President Trump's core supporters, the Epstein-Maxwell case was a sort of litmus test for trust in government, in the authorities, that if you were essentially black-pilled, if you knew that everybody was corrupt, then this was a great test case for seeing just how awake you were to the excesses of government and the cover-ups and the conspiracies. I mean, that's true. That's just the way that the online ecosystem works. However, when President Trump speaks for the American people more generally, and he says, guys, don't we have better things to do? You can understand his irritation. The man is trying to negotiate an end to a war in the Gaza Strip. He's trying to negotiate an end to a war in Ukraine. He's attempting to revivify the American economy.
All right, we don't need to hear all this nonsense. Let me skip up a little bit.
But of course, there are people who are genuinely upset, Tucker Carlson among them. Tucker Carlson put out an email newsletter that said, quote, apparently Jeffrey Epstein is innocent. The government is doing a bad job of getting us to believe it's Jeffrey Epstein's story. Okay, so first of all, no one claims that Jeffrey Epstein was innocent. No one claims that. Seriously. The DOJ doesn't claim that. He died in prison. So, no. The actual claim is that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. And also that there is no gigantic list of third parties to whom Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking children.
Now, remember, the title of this video is The Real Jeffrey Epstein Story. And Ben Shapiro is putting it on the record that there is no list of individuals that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking other women to, which we now know to be bullshit. So Ben, I mean, with his connections, and believe me, we're going to get into his connections in a little bit, and his experience, and, everything that he saw with the Hunter Biden laptop, and how, all those people, the entire intelligence apparatus was lying. And then just a few short leaders, he's here saying that there is no reason not to believe the same sources. There's no reason not to believe the DOJ. There's no reason not to believe the FBI. No reason not to believe the CIA. But that was not the case a couple of years ago. And he's going from one extreme to the other. And there has to be a reason why. There has to be something to make that make sense.
Doesn't mean he was innocent in any way. But again, all of this is part and parcel of a broader theory that's being spun out by people like Tucker, that the real story here, the real story is that Jeffrey Epstein was either a domestic intelligence agent or a domestic intelligence asset working for the CIA or with the CIA, or a foreign intelligence asset on X, obviously, because this is how X is constructed. He must be Mossad, right? This was the going theory.
That's why. That's why Jeffrey Epstein must be Mossad. It's because somebody said it on X. It has nothing to do with, the fact that he said in the emails that he was working for the Rothschilds, the family that kind of helped make Mossad possible. Just saying. It has nothing to do with the fact that his partner was Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, one of the most famous Mossad agents of all time. The person that was responsible for facilitating the sale of Promise software to nations all over the globe that gave at least one nation and intelligence backdoor access to just hack into their computer and see everything. And then, a month after, the book, The Samson Option, came out that said that he was a Mossad agent, that he was found thrown over his yacht. But there's no reason. There's no reason. Even though Robert Maxwell was buried at the Mount of Olives, one of the most holy lands in the world. But there's no reason. The only reason anybody thought for 1 second that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent or worked, I don't think he was a Mossad agent. Let's be real. I think that he operated in his own little gray zone, but he had affiliations. But the only reason for anybody to ever think that is because of X and this gosh darn Tucker Carlson.
In the online space. And if the evidence is not released to justify that theory, or if the DOJ and FBI say that theory isn't true, that is not proof that the theory isn't true. It's not even evidence the theory isn't true. It actually is evidence the theory is true. And this is the problem with conspiracy theories generally. There are indeed conspiracies. We'll discuss one that the FBI and DOJ are investigating in a moment. But the great wonder of a conspiracy theory is that it is totally unfalsifiable. So if the DOJ and FBI say there's no evidence for the proposition that you are putting forth, this just means they're in on it. There's an old joke.
But isn't that exactly what he was saying with the Hunter Biden laptop? Isn't that exactly what he said with the Hunter Biden laptop? When all of them said that there was nothing there and that it was nothing. He was sitting there saying, screw those 50 agents, the whole apparatus, they're all crooked. They're all lying. I'm going to make a whole episode titling that they're lying. They rigged the election with the media to cover up the lie and to help rig the election. And if you tried posting the truth on social media, they were going to take your posts down. That is exactly what Ben Shapiro was saying with the Hunter Biden laptop. But now, all of a sudden, when we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, there's no reason not to believe them. I have no reason. I mean, maybe some evidence will come up, and if it does, we'll deal with it then. But, I have no reason not to, why wouldn't I believe Trump? His name was only in there over 30,000 times. I mean, if it was over 40,000, then yeah, maybe you'd have a conversation about it. But it's not 40,000. It's only 30,000. So for now, I have no reason not to believe, and anybody who says that Jeffrey Epstein was working for Israel, it's, oh my God, it's a conspiracy theorist. It's something you'd see on X. This is the problem with X. It's because they spread all this misinformation, and people like Tucker Carlson should be deplatformed. It's absurd. You understand the contradictions here? Where are Ben Shapiro's loyalties really lying? Because a couple years ago, when it was convenient for him and his platform and his channel and his agenda, he was totally against censorship. He was totally against the system. The whole intelligence apparatus, they were all in on it. They rigged the election. The media was bad, right? And that is when people trusted him. That is when I started to trust him a little bit and paid attention to him and watched him, because he's acknowledging that the system is flawed and that the system is evil and corrupt and that they're lying. And that's how they draw you in. That's how somebody like that draws you in. So then when there's another scandal on their side, that all of a sudden it's the opposite. It's a conspiracy theory. And this is the problem, is that the wedge, the left and the right are so far on the other sides of the spectrum that they cling on to these people. If you're on the left, you're watching like a Stephen Colbert, Rachel Maddow, whoever the hell the people on the left watches. Then if you're on the right, it's Ben Shapiro. And when each side is doing something wrong, which they're always doing, people like Ben Shapiro will have no problem calling it out and talking about how corrupt the system it is, and that they're rigging this, and that they can't be trusted, and that they're lying, and that this one belongs in jail. But then the other side is sitting there saying the same thing that he's saying now when we're talking about Epstein. They just go back and forth. And that's why I say it's all a show. It's all WWE. It's all bullshit. This is all to trick us and to keep us fighting with each other instead of being objective. Remember what Erica Kirk said the other day when she was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, how all these people on both sides were hanging out together. They were celebrating. They were drinking champagne. They were all having a great time, getting along for one day. Yeah, I'm sure it's one day. It's always the one day that they get together. So whenever they're on camera, they're at each other's throats. They're talking about how everyone belongs in jail. Yet regardless of who wins the election, who's in office, whether it's the left or the right, nobody ever really goes to jail. You'll get some kind of big scandal trial once in a while. You'll get an indictment, but really, is there ever any real change? Have you ever seen an administration that was corrupt, or a whole unit in the FBI all just get hauled in? It never happens. It never happens. They just keep us arguing with each other and following the narrative, and they keep us, it's a simple divide and conquer tactic.
About a man who goes to heaven, and the first question he asks God is, who shot JFK? And God looks at the man and he says, well, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And he shot him, right? It was Lee Harvey Oswald. And the man says, I never realized the conspiracy went this high, right? Once you reach the level.
See, I guess that was supposed to be a joke. That was supposed to be a joke of Ben Shapiro saying that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK, which we all know is not the case at all. Like, definitely not on that one. He called me a conspiracy theorist for that, but that's what he's implying. He's completely trying to shoot down conspiracy theories and say that there is no reason not to trust these people.
Level where you have no evidence for your suppositions, but your suppositions are more important than any of the evidence or even the credibility of the people you're attacking. And let's be clear, when people like Tucker are attacking the DOJ and the FBI here, they're attacking President Trump's DOJ and President Trump's FBI. They're not just attacking Pam Bondi, who, again, I think acted really irresponsibly by feeding this monster for a while without the evidence to actually support it. But the attacks are not just on Pam Bondi for being inconsistent. The attacks are on the entire Trump administration, because if you actually believe the proposition that the Trump administration knows better and is lying to you in order to cover for a child trafficking sex monster, if that is your supposition, then just say it. Really, just say it. Because that's what you would have to suppose. There is no third choice. Even if you believe that the Trump administration is doing this to cover for a domestic intelligence agency or a foreign intelligence agency, that would still be evil. Right? If you're an American elected government and you are covering for child sex trafficking by either the United States or our allies, that is an act of evil, obviously. So just accuse the people in power of the evil if you're actually going to do it. Instead, what you get are sort of broad, speculative ideas about how this is seeding a revolution, which, of course, is a permission structure for revolution. And one of the ways that the left has become so violent over time, and they really have, is because many major figures on the left have said, well, it's not that I'm excusing violence, but you have to understand the feelings of Luigi Mangio. It's not that I'm excusing violence, but you have to understand where the revolutionary fervor is coming from in the streets with Black Lives Matter. It's not that I'm in favor of violence, but you have to understand the concerns and the deep wellspring of upset and feeling among Antifa in Portland. And this is what the left does in order to create a permission structure for revolution and violence. And on the
As opposed to, oh my God, look at his eyes. Whoa, he looks possessed. Yo, I didn't do that on purpose, I swear. Look at him. Yo, I gotta leave this for a second. This is too good. Yo, oh my God, I couldn't have timed that if I planned. Shit, now I don't even know what I was gonna say. I mean, I do, but I'm having trouble processing the words to get it out because I'm just so freaked out by this right now. Well, what I was gonna say is, the way that he's speaking up against evil and violence and saying that this is evil and unjustifiable and this and that. I mean, all I'm going to say is I really wish he brought that energy to geopolitics and what's happening in the Middle East. I'll just leave that at that.
On the right, the same thing can be done. So here is Tucker doing precisely that, suggesting that President Trump's Epstein cover-up is going to spark a revolution. Here's with Sagar and Jetty.
So they're not stupid.
But how can you say that thousands of children were raped, but I'm not going to find out who raped them?
Yeah.
How can you say that?
I agree completely.
They said that. By the way, when Pam Bondi went on television and said, I have a videotape of kids getting abused, I followed this case closely, and I know a lot of the people involved, as I've told you. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. I didn't know that. Really? Thousands of children got raped?
Yeah.
Who raped them? Where are the rapists? Like, why aren't they in jail? This is the Department of Justice.
Yes.
That is so crazy. This is honestly one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my entire life. And I just think it's very dangerous to play around with this stuff. Like, very dangerous.
Well,
I don't want a revolution, but if you wanted a revolution, this is how you would act.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, if you don't want a revolution, maybe instead of suggesting that this is a giant cover-up by the federal government, you would instead suggest that Pam Bondi was incompetent in the way that she retailed this story to the public in the first place, as opposed to suggesting that it's a continuing cover-up for child sex trafficking. Alex Jones is creative. He's come up.
And remember, that is what Ben Shapiro is saying is the real story. That, Jeffrey Epstein was definitely not working with intelligence. That, the Trump administration, the DOJ, despite how dishonest the Biden administration was, and despite the fact that just a couple of years ago that everybody was lying, and covering up the crimes and the sins of the people on the left, that now that we got the Trump administration, you know, the most honest and transparent administration that we've ever had, you know, we need to trust them. They're all honest. How could we ever accuse them of lying? How could we ever accuse them of covering up anything evil? Like, why wouldn't we take their word for it? You know, like so Ben Shapiro's real story, what he claims to be the real story of the Epstein case is that Pam Bondi, you know, was just incompetent when it came to how she was telling the public about what they had. That she, you know, like maybe she didn't have thousands of pictures and videos of what was happening to kids. And there was definitely no such client list. Ben Shapiro said it himself, and he put the real Jeffrey Epstein story as the title of the video so that everybody would know. Just like a couple years ago, he said everybody lied on the title of the video to explain the Hunter Biden laptop story. But, you know, you can't point out that contradiction, because then they're just going to say it's a Democrat hoax. You know, I'm a conspiracy theorist. You know, maybe I should be deplatformed. You know, if I was talking about the Democrats, though, or, you know, about like Qatar or one of these other, if I was talking about Iran, then Ben Shapiro would be free speech all day. But the second you start going on the other side, and not so much. Now, hold on. Let's get to this other clip. See our buddies Kash Patel and Dan Bongino.
You're going to accept Dick Durbin's word, or whoever that guy is, as to who is on that list and who isn't, and that it can and can't be released? Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are.
Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
The American people have a right to know. And Donald Trump is the most transparent president in our nation's history. So not only will America get the full Epstein files, they will get JFK, they will get Martin Luther King.
And to me, that's a thing I think President Trump should run on. On day one, roll out the black book.
There are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn. And there are hundreds of victims.
We want an investigation. I want a full investigation. And that's what I absolutely am demanding. That's what our Attorney General, our great Attorney General, is doing. He's doing a full investigation.
Folks, please keep your eye on this case. I can't emphasize to you enough. This Epstein thing is there's more than meets the eye there. I know a lot of people want to make this thing go away. There is absolutely no way that the now CIA director, Catherine Rumler, and everyone else didn't know they were talking to a sex offender. The question is, why were they talking to him, and what were they trying to make go away? Does it have anything to do with the extensive video network alleged to have existed on his island and on his plane? What were they fixing?
Okay, so again, here is the conclusion that I'm coming to. Every single one of those people is asking the same questions that you're asking, and Tucker's asking, and Rogan is asking, and Glenn is asking, and I'm asking. We've all been asking. They were all asking those questions. So you either have to believe they got into office, all of them, many of those quotes are from when they're in office, and they decided that they were then going to participate in the cover-up after having spun up the same questions everybody else is asking, or you have to believe they got in, saw the evidence, and then made a call based on the evidence that they had now seen. It seems to me the second theory is far more plausible than the first. So here's the deal. It is our job to follow the evidence, or lack of evidence, wherever that leads. Again, I do not have more evidence today that answers my questions than I did yesterday or the day before, except that I do have the word of people I trust who do have access to that evidence. I didn't suddenly gain access to more information, but you know who did. Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, J.D. Vance, President Trump. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were among the loudest voices demanding the truth about Epstein. You heard them do it right there. And they, like many of us, strongly suspected a cover-up in Epstein's death and hoped for a bombshell revelation. These guys were not the shills for the establishment. They literally built their reputations by challenging it. And, by the way, by uncovering conspiracies. Dan Bongino, full disclosure, a friend of mine, has been a stalwart defender of truth and transparency. He was the guy who's on the front lines exposing the Russiagate hoax. The guy who's been calling out the weaponization of federal aid.
All right, I can't listen to this idiot right now. I just want to point something out to you guys, okay? These files, and Ben Shapiro knows this. Ben Shapiro knows this. When did Epstein get arrested the last time and allegedly off himself? 2019. So when was this investigation being done? When were these files being made? When were these reports being made? During the Biden administration. The Biden administration, the Biden DOJ, the Biden intelligence, that Ben Shapiro said himself were all liars and that none of them were credible. It's not Trump's administration that did the investigation. They were just supposed to release the files. Why isn't Ben Shapiro pointing that out? Like, that's what I said the real story should have been. I said the entire time that the files were not going to be, like both sides have been so corrupt. We know that the Democrats were corrupt. We know that the Biden administration was corrupt. So you had to imagine that those Epstein files were going to be compromised. And like, I wasn't surprised when I found out that Trump's name was in there more than anybody else. But they didn't say that. Because they're not going to point the finger at the other side of the aisle. They're not going to say, hey, we're not releasing the files because, we're in a pissing match with the Democrats and they cooked the books. Because if they tell us that, then there's no reason to trust the system. Then they're pulling the curtain. They're letting us all see just how corrupt the system really is and that they can't be trusted. And then the whole thing falls down. So they had no choice but to cover it up. And that is my theory of what really happened with the Epstein files. I think that there was a lot of stuff in there that they were cooking the books. And when the Trump administration saw it, they're like, oh no, there's no way we could put this out. And even Obama, I wish I had that clip, but Obama said at one point that in this age of information and the internet, that all you could do is muddy the water, that people just put out so much, like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once the information is out, it's out. So all you could do is try to flood it with misinformation and lies and hope that people get so confused that they don't know the difference. And Ben Shapiro knows this. He's a really smart guy. He's a really smart guy. For anything, like I'm not going to compliment his character or his integrity or his beliefs in any way, but I will say this. He is a very, very smart guy. And I think he has good pattern recognition too. That's why I'm having so much trouble buying this. But, chat, you guys know who Alan Dershowitz is?
With Professor Dershowitz, the only way to...
Guys, put a 1 in the chat if you guys know who Alan Dershowitz is.
How did you, a defense attorney, best known for being a lifelong Democrat and defending who a lot of people would consider...
I'm sorry. You know what? I'm gonna go small for this one. Now, this is where it's going to get really good tonight, because this is where my pattern recognition kicked in while I was doing my research. I'm not going to get into too many details now. We're going to get into it as we go. Sorry, I'm just finding my phone charger. My phone's going to die. I'm not going to spill the beans now. I'm going to get into the details as we go. But this is where the but comes in. That's all I'm going to say.
Thanks so much for stopping by.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Why don't we start with the obvious question. How did you, a defense attorney, best known for being a lifelong Democrat and defending who a lot of people would consider on the Republican side to be criminals, how do you end up a hero of the right? How did this happen?
I shouldn't be a hero of the right any more than I should have been a hero of the left when I defended many people who were left-wingers. I've always been a neutral civil libertarian. Sometimes my civil liberties lands on the side of the left and then they love me. And then sometimes my civil liberties lands on the side of the right and they love me and the other side hates me. For example, I started writing my book about impeachment when Hillary Clinton looked like she was going to be elected. And the name of the book was called The Case Against Impeaching Hillary Clinton. I would have written the same book had she been elected, except they would have built a statue to me on Martha's Vineyard and I'd be the hero of the left today. But I make the same argument, just change the name of the book.
Now, I also want to point out, okay, This interview was conducted in March of 2020. Not around the same time period as that whole Hunter Biden laptop, everybody lied video that he did. All right, this was in 2020. Also, it was a couple of months after Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself.
From Clinton to Trump, and now I'm hated by the hard left and loved by the right. I deserve neither. A civil libertarian shouldn't be loved or hated by anybody but people who deeply believe in civil liberties, due process, shoe on the other foot test, neutral principles.
So do you think that something has happened within the Democratic Party that has changed? Because, again, it wasn't just that you were a Democrat for most of your career. You're still a Democrat, presumably. The real question is, what has changed such that the hatred for you is so strong? Is it just the association with Trump, or did it start before that? Because it feels like it started a little bit before that.
I think so. I think that today the Democratic Party, if you want to be a full-on member, you have to buy everything they say and everything they do. And I'm just not that kind of a person. And I put politics way behind civil liberties, due process, the Constitution. And so I think...
Alan Dershowitz, a hero for the Constitution. All right, now let me give you guys a little backstory about Alan Dershowitz, okay? Now, not a lot of people know this. He was one of the lawyers that was on the OJ, that helped get OJ off. We all know that he was one of the lawyers that got Jeffrey Epstein his sweetheart deal back in 2007, part of which by, instead of charging him as running a sex trafficking ring, he made it so that he was charged as a like it was a prostitution thing. Like they charged him for hiring prostitutes, and some of which, may or may not have been underage. So instead of him going to jail for a very long time and having real consequences, they gave him 18 months with a 12-hour timeout for work release. And that was it. But Alan Dershowitz was also a close friend to Jeffrey Epstein. He actually went on the record as saying that he was introduced to them by the Rothschilds. Very interesting. But Alan Dershowitz, he also represented Trump, which we'll get into later. He represented Trump with Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and Ken Starr. That was like the all-star legal team. Ken Starr, one of the other attorneys that defended Jeffrey Epstein in that 2007 case. But, that's another story. But one thing that a lot of people might not know about Alan Dershowitz was that he was the youngest full professor in the history of Harvard. That's right. Alan Dershowitz was a professor at Harvard University for 50 years, just shy of 50 years. I'm pretty sure from 1964 to I think he retired in 2013. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that Harvard Law is a breeding ground for CIA recruitment since the 60s. And you can look this up. It is a big, think about it. If you're in intelligence and you're going to try to recruit assets, what better time? It's get them young. It's always get them young. And Harvard is one of the most prestigious universities in the country, in the world, and it has the brightest minds and the wealthiest families with the connections. So it makes sense that the CIA and maybe not other intelligence agencies would want to recruit at Harvard University. And now I'm going to do a whole deep dive. One of the episodes is where we're going to talk about all the different students that Alan Dershowitz had over the years. But one thing that they're not really talking about, which actually they touch on lightly in here, is that Ben Shapiro was one of Alan Dershowitz's students. Ben Shapiro went to Harvard. And I didn't even realize this. But not only did Ben Shapiro go to Harvard, he went to Harvard from 2004 to 2007. Jeffrey Epstein got arrested in 2005. That sweetheart deal he got was in 2007. So knowing that, there is a very high probability that Alan Dershowitz may have been representing Jeffrey Epstein while he was teaching Ben Shapiro. Guys, put a 1 in the chat if this is the first time you're hearing this. And when I found that out, I'm like, oh my God, it blew my mind. And then I started going deeper into Harvard, and I'm like, wait a minute, Lawrence Summers, another person that's definitely not on the Epstein list. Lawrence Summers was the president of Harvard from 2001 to 2006. Lawrence Summers and Alan Dershowitz were both two of Jeffrey Epstein's best friends. In fact, Lawrence Summers was one of the executors on Epstein's will. And Lawrence Summers, he in the 90s, he was World Bank chief economist, development economies. He worked in the U.S. Treasury under Bill Clinton. Actually, it's kind of funny because he was undersecretary for international affairs. All right, one of Jeffrey Epstein's best friends was undersecretary for international affairs between 1993 and 1995 during the same exact period that Jeffrey Epstein went to the White House 17 times to visit Bill Clinton. And then, by the time you got to 2009, after his time at Harvard, he was the NEC director, National Economist Council, where he was basically one of the people in charge for economic policy, both foreign and domestic, working directly under the president and having the Secretary of Treasury working under him. My mind was blown when I started finding this stuff out. And I'm like, oh my God, they're all so Shapiro went to Harvard, was being taught by Alan Dershowitz while Alan Dershowitz was representing Jeffrey Epstein, while the president of Harvard was one of Jeffrey Epstein's best friends. But, I'm sure that there is no conflict of interest there, and no reason for for Ben Shapiro to want to write off the whole, Jeffrey Epstein thing as a conspiracy. Despite the fact that Alan, if there's a list, and I'm not even saying a list as in people that were being trafficked to, but when you look at people that were in close proximity to Jeffrey Epstein for an extended period of time, Lawrence Summers and Alan Dershowitz are near the top of that list. And if you look at people that influenced Ben Shapiro and possibly his career, they might be on the top of that list too. Because again, Ben Shapiro went to Harvard, a CIA breeding ground, with Lawrence Summers being president and Alan Dershowitz being one of his professors. But now, with that in mind, let's watch this interview and let's see if anything lands a little bit differently. This is a long interview. Let's get to the juicy parts. Oh, no. Sorry. Sorry. I know, guys.
What Dershowitz said, and they knew I didn't.
And the point that I immediately knew that you were making, because it's a point that I've made myself, and it is an obvious point, because the counterpoint is completely idiotic, which is that if a president does a thing that is within his legal power to do, and that is tainted by his own self-interest, but it is in his legal power to do this thing, but he also has a self-interest as either a combined motive or a secondary motive, that's not impeachable, because that's just called politics, and every politician does that. Right. Every time Barack Obama did anything that was within his power to do with an eye toward re-election, that was called his first term. And to pretend that that's impeachable activity, which is what the Democrats effectively were doing, is not impeachable.
I gave that example. I said, let's assume the following. President Obama promises he's going to bomb Syrian military if they use chemical weapons. They use chemical weapons. His advisor comes in and says, ooh, wait a minute, before you start bombing, think about what it will do to your election. The left will turn against you. And Obama says, oh my God, really, I shouldn't bomb. I'll break my promise. Would that be impeachable? Of course not. And I don't limit it to presidents. I said any elected official always has mixed motives. They care about the national interest, but they always have an eye on their political future. And all I said was, if a president has one eye on his re-electability because he thinks his electability is in the national interest, that can turn innocent conduct within his power into an impeachable offense. There is nobody who would disagree with that, yet Adam Schiff pretended to disagree with it. Nadler pretended to disagree with it. Schumer pretended to disagree with it. All three of them were lying through their teeth. And I wrote that in the Wall Street Journal. I got a lot of criticism. How dare you challenge the motives of people? Well, I am challenging their motives.
Yeah, as soon as this thing broke.
Again, they have absolutely no problem calling people liars and calling out corruption when it's on the other side and saying that the system is rigged. They're rigging elections. They're covering this up. They're lying about that. But then the second the spotlight is on people within their circle, then it's like, well, then you're going to have to believe this. What? That's what you think? That's what you believe? Like, that's impossible. How could you think that? They would never do that. It's ridiculous.
The first reaction that I had was that the question in the end was going to be about President Trump's motives. If it came out that he had said to John Bolton, for example, that Bolton had testified and then he had said openly, the reason that I did this specifically is because I want to knock Joe Biden out for purposes of the 2020 election, then that would have been impeachable conduct. But if he had an eye back toward 2016 and he was saying, I want everything in 2016 looked at because it bothers me and annoys me and I think it's in the national interest, and even if that was badly informed, as some of that stuff was, the crowd strike stuff and all the rest of it, then that is not impeachable. That's just what we call bad judgment, and he's up for election.
And that's why we decide who to vote for based on bad judgment. But that's not impeachable conduct. The other example I gave is Joe Biden says, unless you fire the prosecutor, I'm withholding $1 billion.
You know what?
Look, either they didn't know what I said. I think
they got my
I suspect that what happened is, and it's more than a suspicion, it's based on information that I have, is that Zucker, the head of CNN, made when he was being impeached, and I favored his impeachment.
Then that is not like a difference in moral system that has happened in the United States. I mean, it used to be, even when I was growing up, that people would say, it's a free country, you can sort of do what you want. And people don't tend to use that phrase too much anymore. There's a lot of talk about things that you shouldn't say, maybe you should be pushed into saying them, or things that you, or the other factors that are supposed to attend to justice beyond your own individual case. You talk about a lot of this in guilt by accusation, but this came out most famously during the Kavanaugh hearings, when it seemed as though the evidentiary necessity to prove a case against Justice Kavanaugh was completely thrown by the wayside by the media. The mere accusation was enough to slime him because obviously he was a white man in a position of privilege and power, as opposed to a woman who apparently who alleged that he had abused her without not only no evidence, but every single piece of evidence that she tried to stack up immediately fell apart, including people she said were at the party in which he somehow wronged her, saying that they weren't at that party and the party never took place. And still we're told that Kavanaugh is some sort of rapist.
Right. Well, you know, when the Columbia School of Journalism had me interviewed for the Journal of Columbia Journalism, supposed to be the paradigm, the interviewer said, well, you can't be a victim of a false accusation. You're a white, old male. I mean, that's the way journalists now approach this problem. It's all identity politics. Doesn't matter what the evidence is, it matters who you are, not who you are, what you are, what your identity is. That determines whether you get free speech, whether you have trigger warnings, whether you are silenced, whether you're allowed to speak on campus, like the two of us have all kinds of difficulties speaking on campus. It has nothing to do with our ideas. They refuse to take us on based on our ideas. It's all about who you are. How dare you exercise your white privilege by coming on campus and telling us what you think?
So what do you think the future is for due process? I mean, that's the most basic right that we have, is this right to due process, the right to be treated according to the circumstance of our case and be judged on the merits of the case, as opposed to what you think of me as a human being, or more importantly, what you think of my group identity as a human being. That seems like it's going completely by the wayside. I mean, there were, as I say about Kavanaugh, there were full articles written about how because he was a powerful white male, he should not be given due process. He didn't deserve due process. And you've seen the definition of racism itself morph and change formally. People who used to say racism was discrimination on the basis of race will now say that it's discriminatory intent on the basis of race combined with power, which of course immediately suggests that if you're a member of a victimized group, that you can't be engaged in racism.
Or a sexist, or any other ist. You can't be an anti-Semite either if you're a member of an oppressed group. No, there's no question about that. Look, deep down, not very many people care about due.
Guys, sorry about that. For some reason, my thing gave me the wrong timestamps. It mixed it up with a different video.
Simpson obviously was convicted of doing something, but it was fairly minimal. And by the way, I don't.
Somebody who they believe committed a criminal act. The inquisitorial system. Do you think that the U.S. is the best system, or do you think that
I think it's the best system for the United States. I wouldn't ever try to impose our system on foreign countries. By the way, many of the countries that have become free after the breakdown of the Soviet Union have had an option of going with the American system, with the European system, and many have gone with the American system. You know, as Churchill said about democracy, I could say about the adversary system, the worst ever invented, except for all the others that have been tried over time. I think there is an adversarial relationship between a person accused of crime and the state. And you can't bury that adversarial relationship in paternalism or any other kind of euphemism. There really is a conflict. Our job as criminal defense attorneys is to get the best deal. Jeffrey Epstein, look at that. I got him a very good deal, and I was hated for it.
Look how proud he is. Look how proud this freaking guy is. He's like, Jeffrey Epstein, look at that. I got him a really good deal. I got him a really good deal. Yeah, we know there was like 60 victims at least, and you attacked them, and you got him 18 months with a 12-hour-day work release. And then he gets up here with Ben Shapiro bragging about how he's all for the Constitution, he's all for America. He got him such a great deal. Look at that. And this is like these are supposed to be our reliable sources of information, right?
But that's my job. If I had done anything less than get him the best deal I possibly could, I would have been doing something in violation of my...
Now, notice how he says that's my job. He's not pointing out that it's one of his good friends, because the whole point of this interview is to do like this little fluff piece to try to build up his PR, because everybody was attacking him and hating him, and he's trying to come off more likable. And his former student, Ben Shapiro, is here to make sure that the public starts to like him again, and they try to proclaim him a hero of the right. That's what Ben Shapiro said. You're a hero of the right. How did this happen?
Oath of office. And so it creates a moral conflict. I don't sleep well at night when I defend somebody who I believe probably did it. I've never had a client who's gone out and done it again, that has committed a second murder or done something.
Yo, the balls on this guy. The balls on this guy. This is in 2020, after Epstein was already off the board. And he's sitting there saying, I never had a client that got anybody. Like OJ, you know, you never heard of him getting accused of murder again, right? Because OJ was one of his other clients. And he represented Donald Trump, but that's a whole other story. But yo, like they have no respect for us. They just lie through their teeth.
Something horrible, horrible. O.J. Simpson obviously was convicted of doing something, but it was fairly minimal. And by the way, I don't take a case. I don't represent a person twice.
He's saying, now, mind you, I want you to think about what he just said. All right? This is important. Let me get his face back on here. Chat, did you hear what he just said? When referencing Jeffrey Epstein, he's saying he was guilty of something, but it was fairly minimal. All of those victims, everything that we now know that the files have been released, that happened to those children and to those women, Alan Dershowitz is on the record with Ben Shapiro saying it was fairly minimal. And remember, Alan Dershowitz was one of the professors for Ben Shapiro at Harvard around the same time frame that he was getting Jeffrey Epstein off for those fairly minimal crimes.
I have a rule. I have several rules. I don't represent somebody who is in the business of crime. I don't want to be the consigliere to a crime family. I don't represent drug dealers. I don't represent professional terrorists or people like that. But I will represent.
Yeah, he's like, I don't represent he's basically saying, I don't represent bad guys. I don't represent criminals. Meanwhile, look at his track record. He's got OJ, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. I mean, come on. Yo, maybe this is where fucking Ben Shapiro learned his bullshit from, or you think he was just born with it?
Represent anybody once, regardless of how serious the crime is. Now, obviously, would I represent a Nazi who killed members of my family? No, there'd be a conflict of interest there. I'd want so much to see him convicted. But if I have no personal, emotional conflict of interest, I don't let...
This whole conversation seems like it's a conflict of interest.
let the seriousness of the crime influence my decision whether to take it.
So another area where you've obviously become very well known, I mean, there are a bunch of different areas because you're sort of a master of several different trades, is in the pro-Israel space. And
right.
I would suggest to you actually that your unpopularity on the left began with the intervention in the pro-Israel space long before.
Oh, I think that's right.
The President Trump stuff happened. People don't know about that because people who don't follow the pro-Israel space don't actually follow the pro-Israel space. But as soon as you wrote the case for Israel, it seemed like the left turned on you, or at least a segment of the left, turned on you in fairly vicious fashion, it seemed
right.
like.
More the hard left. Noam Chomsky commissioned Norman Finkelstein to try to find problems in the book. And he found a quote from Mark Twain, which I quoted and attributed to Mark Twain. And he said, I didn't find it in Mark Twain. I found it in a book by a woman named
Joan Peters.
Joan Peters, whose book had been criticized. Yeah, I mean, first of all, we both found it in the same place. We found it in a little pamphlet called Facts and something or other, which was put out by some pro-Israel organization, which you couldn't cite, obviously, because it's not in libraries. But we both found it in the same place. But, you know, he accused me of plagiarism. I immediately went to Harvard University, the president, and said, I want a study commission. They appointed Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, to investigate the charge of plagiarism. He said there was nothing to it. But that was the first attempt to attack my integrity because I supported Israel.
So why do you think it is that the hard left has turned so far against Israel? Why do you think that's being mainstreamed into the Democratic Party? This scares the living hell out of me, frankly.
We start very easily. The hard left, the hard left turned against turned against Israel when the Communist Party turned against Israel. It was as simple as that. 1967, Israel wins the war. The Soviet Union breaks relationships with Israel. The Communist parties all over the world turn against Israel because they're taking orders from Stalin. It's simple, not Stalin in those days, but the Stalinists in those days. It was as simple as that back then. Then Berrigan, I write about this in my book called Defending Israel.
Now think about it. Right now, Alan Dershowitz is like talking about stuff that happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s. He was already a professor at Harvard. And again, starting the 60s, around the same time that Alan Dershowitz became the youngest full professor with tenure in the history of the university, I think to this day, was also around the same time that the CIA began using Harvard as like a breeding ground to recruit future agents. Like, so all this talk about, oh, is this one Mossad? Is that one Mossad? It's maybe, just maybe, we got it backwards. Maybe Epstein was CIA. Maybe Alan Dershowitz was CIA, is CIA. Maybe Ben Shapiro is CIA. It's a fair question. And I really think that just to assume that they're all Mossad because they're pro-Israeli and because they're Jewish might be a little anti-Semitic when you look at the full scope. Now, it's very possible that Alan Dershowitz could be Mossad and Ben Shapiro. It's also very possible that they've just been married and that they've been working hand in unison this entire time. Guys, you got to remember, the CIA was established right after World War II. And then like a year later, Israel was established. And then a year after that, Mossad was established. So they've definitely been working hand in hand, maybe not in unison, but they've been working closely, even if it was a tumultuous relationship at times, and even if they weren't always on the same page and always happy, they have been working together. So if we are an occupied government and our intelligence is infiltrated, it could have happened a very long time ago. Or maybe the people that really run things have just been controlling both and just use different things to their advantage based on the different laws. You know, all this AI tech, all this mass surveillance stuff that I've been trying to warn everybody about, they're already using it in Israel. It's already being used in Gaza. It's been getting used. And a lot of the people that are behind that tech, they're Americans. They're American citizens. Larry Ellison has had contracts with the CIA since the late 80s. And he is the #1 largest individual donor to the IDF. So people really need to start keeping an open mind and take a step back and start asking yourself, like, what is really going on? And is this whole anti-Israel movement just one more psyop for us to try to trick us into stepping over certain lines so that they have an excuse and they have justification to take down these platforms, to shut down people's YouTubes, to cancel people's Facebook accounts under hate speech laws that we already know are unconstitutional. But if they're unconstitutional, why would they be for it? Because at the end of the day, they're all working together to control us.
Berrigan, who is a paragon of the left during the Vietnam War, calls Israel a criminal community, a Jewish criminal community. So you get Berrigan, Chomsky, Finkelstein. Creeps into the center left, and you get people like Peter Beinart, who become enemies of Israel, though they proclaim that they're really Zionists. J Street, which has never said anything positive about Israel in any of its press releases, and supported the Goldstone report. And they've now made it possible for Democrats to say, we're not going to go to AIPAC. Liz Warren says, I'm not going to AIPAC. So I think the Democratic Party, we're in danger of seeing the bipartisan support for Israel weakened as the result of the left of the Democratic Party.
I think this is one of the things people are missing. So I hear this a lot from Democrats who are Jews, which is the vast majority of Jews are Democrats, is that the reason that the Democrats are turning against Israel is because of Trump. And that's completely neglecting the history of the Democratic Party, which was wildly pro-Israel throughout at least the early 1990s, and then it began to move and shift. You can see this in the opinion polls. And by the time Barack Obama was president, it had moved fairly solidly into the Palestinian camp, at least in terms of being on parity with Israel in terms of popularity inside the Democratic Party. And this is particularly true among young Democrats. And Obama obviously facilitated that. I mean, President Obama was not a fan of the state of Israel. He hated Prime Minister Netanyahu. Obviously, the attempt to pin that on President Trump is pretty astonishing, again, considering that the mainstream Democratic Party had been moving in this direction for quite a while, labeling Israel an apartheid state. And
no doubt about that. And I think President Obama, for whom I voted twice, I now would reconsider my second vote for him. He conned me. He called me into the Oval Office and he said, I have Israel's back. And I didn't realize what he meant is to put a target on it and stab them. As he was leaving office, he ordered his representative to the UN to not veto a resolution which declared the Kotel, the Western Wall, the holiest place of Judaism, to be occupied territory, along with the access roads to Hebrew University and the Hadassah Hospital and the Jewish Quarter. It was outrageous. And it just legitimated.
Now, just keep in mind what I said earlier, okay? Again, they're doing the whole left versus right thing. But Alan Dershowitz was a very close friend of Jeffrey Epstein. He was actually stated while writing his 20th book that the only non-relative friend that he would send his books to, like the drafts, to read them over before he got them published, was Jeffrey Epstein. And one of Jeffrey Epstein's other best friends, again, was Lawrence Summers, one of his close associates that he worked with at Harvard. And Lawrence Summers was the National Economic Council director under Obama, the person who ran the Treasury, that ran commerce. The head of Treasury and the head of Commerce, think about it, from 2009, 2010, the head of Treasury and the head of Commerce was answering to Lawrence Summers, Jeffrey Epstein, one of his best friends. So when Alan Dershowitz comes up here, a lifelong Democrat, guy worked at Harvard for almost 50 years, and he starts coming up here and trashing Obama and talking about, oh yeah, the Democrats, like, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a libertarian. I'm all Constitution, and I'm gonna trash Obama because Obama did this. Notice how his whole reason for saying about Obama and criticizing Obama has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has nothing to do with our rights. It's because the way that he felt that he treated Israel towards the end. Just wanted to point that out. It's just worth mentioning.
More and more people in the Democratic Party saying, well, we should have a balance. The Palestinians who have turned down statehood since 38, 48, 67, 90, 2000, 2001, 2007, 2008. So I think the Democratic Party now, there's a real danger of losing the bipartisan support. I think there are many centrist Democrats who still support Israel, but people on the left and younger people to a far, far lesser extent.
And this is why it's driving me up a wall to watch Bernie Sanders try and play on the fact that he's ethnically Jewish as though he's some sort of patriot on behalf of either Israel or Jews. I mean, it's maddening to watch, considering, again, that the man campaigns openly with open anti-Semites like Linda Sarsour and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And
well, you left out one. He went to England and campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, who turned the Labour Party into a party that welcomed anti-Semites, and Bernie Sanders went there and campaigned for him. Let me take one oath here as a Democrat. Under no circumstances will I ever vote for Bernie Sanders, period. I will never vote for Bernie Sanders, and I would hope that other Democrats would join me in that pledge, because he would hurt America terribly. And I think in the end, he would foment some anti-Semitism, because he would hurt America so badly. From what Ronald Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democrats left me. They are quickly leaving me. I feel welcome in the conservative or Republican Party, but I don't feel comfortable with the social conservatism of so many Republicans. I'd love to see a return to kind of Eisenhower Republicanism, Rockefeller Republicanism, but we're not seeing it.
so I want to ask you about sort of your system of values. So you grew up Orthodox,
right?
But obviously you're not Orthodox now. So what is your sort of religious belief system? Because obviously you're very, not only identifiably Jewish, but obviously you speak in terms of Judaism a lot. So where do you hold on this?
Well, I love my Judaism. I love going to synagogue. I'm a traditional Jew, but I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic about atheism. I'm a skeptic about God. The God I'm skeptical about is the Jewish God. I'm skeptical about atheism. I don't call myself anything agnostic atheist. I'm not an atheist because I'm too skeptical. I'm skeptical about science. I'm skeptical. You took my course with Steven Pinker along.
Right there. You catch it?
I'm skeptical about science. I'm skeptical. You took my course with Steven Pinker a long time ago at Harvard. You know that I'm skeptical about everything. I'm skeptical about evolution, explaining everything in biology. I'm going to die a skeptic. I'm going to die not knowing the answers to all these questions, but I hope I'm still healthy enough and wise enough to keep asking the questions. So my religion is skepticism.
So how do you generate a moral system based on skepticism? I remember asking this question. I think I actually raised my hand in your class and asked you this question specifically.
Look at Ben Shapiro. Look at them. Reminiscent of old times. I remember raising my hand to ask you this question in your class. You know, like back when you were representing Jeffrey Epstein, getting him that sweetheart's deal and discrediting all those victims. Yo, how did this not come out sooner? How did this not come out sooner? That Ben Shapiro was one of Alan Dershowitz's students. Ben Shapiro wrote a book. He wrote a book talking about, he had a chapter in there where he's talking about his time at Harvard. And he referenced Randall Kennedy, and he who was the other one? Lonnie Gannier, I think you pronounce it. You know, two of his liberal professors that he did not agree with at all. Although he said that Lonnie was a sweet woman. He just did not agree with her at all. But in his book, I don't think he mentioned that he was in Alan Dershowitz's class. Why would he leave that out? And how come nobody's talking about this? Does Candace know? I really want to know. Does Candace Owens know that Ben Shapiro was going to Harvard and was in Alan Dershowitz's class, one of Jeffrey Epstein's best friends, and was in his class around the same time that Alan Dershowitz was representing Jeffrey Epstein? When Lawrence Summers, one of Jeffrey Epstein's best friends, was president of the university, the executor on Epstein's will. Somebody's got to tell Candace. I think she would have a lot of fun with this. And if she brings it up on her show, listen. A base is base won't kill you. I know I've been critical in the past, but let's call a spade here. All right? Because this is a good one. Oh, shit.
A torture warrant might be permissible.
I did it again. It's all right. There was nothing. You guys weren't missing anything there anyway. I was getting ready for the next clip. I was getting ready. I know, guys. I'm sorry. Bear with me. Hold on. Let me find this transcript to make sure they didn't mess this one up too. Ben Shapiro is waging a battle. Here we go. Damn, I got to get rid of this cough. Oh, hold on. It's Danks. What's up, buddy? I'm streaming. You're on speaker. Oh, I lost them. All right, we tried. Oh, hold on. Yo, what's up? I'm live. You're on speaker.
My bad, bro. I saw you caught it right. I was calling and then you answered when I hung up, dude. Sorry.
Oh, you watching?
Of course I'm watching, bro.
What do you think?
What else would I do with my Friday afternoon?
Yo, I don't know. I'm surprised that you're even watching anything. Yeah, after 4 hours on Barron's show. Damn, you did a great job, by the way.
Thanks,
You want to say hi to everybody?
Yeah, what's up, everyone?
All right.
I just had a taco with some really spicy. We have these like red onions marinated in habanero sauce. It's so fire. What's up, everybody? How's all the basters doing today?
Guys, it's the light squad. It's the light squad. You got to stop with this baster nonsense. What? Guys, put a 1 in the chat if you could hear Danks.
What's up, everybody? I appreciate everyone. Dave appreciates you. Throw a super chat. Light it up with the fucking super chats and push it out because we're going to expose, Bayes is going to expose who Ben Shapiro really is. And you have no idea what's coming. You have no idea. Listen,
are you gonna join the after party later if I switch to StreamYard?
When is that? Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know, 9, 10 o'clock. Or are we gonna wait till tomorrow? Hold on, Danks. Do you want now that you have an idea where we're covering? Do you want later or tomorrow to go over some of the notes so we could break another story tomorrow on the Saturday show?
Whatever you want to do, my friend.
All right. Let me get back to it. I'll hit you up in a little bit.
We'll talk about it later. Yeah. All right. Good luck.
Yo, this guy Danks. Shout out to Danks.
To be more about, what is the solution at hand? Will I try it? And then if it doesn't work, then he pulls out of it. So people have termed that taco, right? Trump always chickens out. I don't think that's right. I think that President Trump is a person who is willing to try different things and then will shift on a dime.
Do you think he's honest?
Those things are working.
Do you think Trump is honest? There was an article in the Wall Street.
Yes, in some ways, no.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just a couple of days ago describing the fishy investments from Abu Dhabi into the Trump family. Our reporter, David Kirkpatrick, who's extremely conservative in his calculations about how he's assessing this, has said that the Trump family has enriched itself to the tune of $4 billion since taking office again in 2024. Does this concern you at all?
Of course. I've been calling this out, I think, before pretty much anybody else. Early on in the Trump administration, when World Liberty Financial was pretty clearly making a fair bit of money over in the Middle East, I raised red flags on my show consistently about how I thought this was wrong. If the name were Biden and instead of Trump, people would be screaming bloody murder. And how this was not beneficial to President Trump's agenda either. So sure, that
well, not beneficial to his agenda or corrupt.
Both, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that if you are.
So Ben Shapiro is getting on the record saying that Donald Trump is corrupt because his family has made over $4 billion since taking office. The same Ben Shapiro that said that Donald Trump, despite the fact that his name came up in those files over 30,000 times, has no reason to lie. Ben Shapiro has, Donald Trump might be corrupt, but Ben Shapiro doesn't think that Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, or Dan Bongino had any reason to lie about those files. And it has nothing to do with the fact that his good friend and former professor, Alan Dershowitz, was all over him and accused of being a potential Mossad agent or asset in the files. In the files. That's not what I'm saying. That's not my opinion. You know, I'm starting to lean more towards the CIA side. I mean, he was at Harvard for like 50 years, you know, so you got to factor that in.
Or taking, you know, what I perceive to be digital assets that are not particularly worthwhile, and then you have people who are politically interested investing massive amounts of money into those things. That is not a good thing.
You voted for him the second time?
I voted for him in 2020, and then I campaigned for him in 2024.
Why?
Because it was now a binary choice between Trump and Kamala Harris, and I liked a lot of what he did during his first administration. I felt the guardrails would largely hold, which I believe they have with regard to President Trump. I know many on the left believe they've not. But what I would
believe
say
the
is
guardrails have held this time?
Yes. I'm hard pressed.
Help me on that, Ben.
Sure.
Because I don't see it even remotely the case. So let me hear your point of view on that.
The Trump administration has not bucked the judiciary to the tune of simply saying that if an appellate court or the Supreme Court rules in a particular way, they will just go ahead and do whatever it is that they want to do. The president does cite legal authority for the things that he is doing.
So you're confident that the Justice Department will pursue corruption charges against the Trump family because it's independent?
I'm confident that the president will likely pardon himself and his children in the same way that Joe Biden did on his way out. I think.
But you're left.
Look at the way he laughs when he says that. Hold on, let me pull that up.
Rules in a particular way, they will just go ahead and do whatever it is that they want to do. The president does cite legal authority for the things that he is doing.
So you're confident that the Justice Department will pursue corruption charges against the Trump family because it's independent?
I'm confident that the president will likely pardon himself and his children in the same way that Joe Biden.
Look at the face he makes when he says that he thinks that President Trump will pardon himself and his family to get out of being prosecuted for corruption charges. But again, he has no reason to believe that Trump or anybody in his administration would lie over Jeffrey Epstein and what really went on in those files. How can anybody take this man serious? How can anybody find him credible? How does he have any credibility? Like, this isn't even funny. You know, like I'll sit here and, you know, make my posts and talk, oh, it's going to be big. This is going to be a great series. We're going to find out all this stuff. But like, this is really sad. Look at him. And he's laughing right to the bank. You know, he's losing thousands of subscribers. He's allegedly, I'm hearing reports that he's buying his views, but he's still laughing at all the corruption in our country, all the victims that aren't getting justice, all of his mutual friends with Jeffrey Epstein that are not getting investigated, that are not getting prosecuted. Again, I'm not accusing anybody of a crime, but, you know, just looking at the evidence, looking at the files, and I told you guys, I did a lot of my own research with AI, and I also used Web. You know, shout out to Kevin. Oh, yeah, by the way, Kevin from Web is going to be on tomorrow night's show with me and Danks. So that's going to be fire. Mark that one on your calendar. 10 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to talk to them. If they could go earlier, then maybe we'll go a little earlier. But tomorrow is going to be fire. And we're going to be talking more about this. Kevin has his own research that he's been doing into Epstein with Zorro Ranch that he's going to bring to the table. So tomorrow's going to be a big episode, and there's going to be a lot of new news. Just like last week when we broke the story, when Danks broke the story that someone at the Dhillon Law Group, somebody that hired the Dhillon Law Group, that they were on the payroll of a verified foreign agent via FAR documents. And then we realized that Ben Shapiro's brother-in-law is a partner at that firm. The same firm that's suing Candace Owens. The same firm that was representing Donald Trump at one point, while Donald Trump had that all-star law team. And who was on Donald Trump's all-star law team? That's right, Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr, two of Jeffrey Epstein's former lawyers. Who else was on that all-star law team? Pam Bondi, the person he tapped for attorney general to cover up the files. And who else? Todd Blanche, the person who's currently stepping in for Pam Bondi as attorney general today after she resigned. And Ben Shapiro thinks it's so funny that he's going to pardon himself and his family to make sure they never have to worry about getting prosecuted. Again, I'm not saying that Ben Shapiro is an intelligence asset or agent, but, you know, he might not have ever met Jeffrey Epstein or even talked to Jeffrey Epstein, but he's close with a lot of people that did. And I think that when Ben Shapiro is sitting there telling everybody the real story, that we need to take it with a grain of salt.
On his way out. I think.
But you're laughing, but that's radically corrupt, is it not?
Again, I think that it was radically corrupt when the DOJ did not pursue, with alacrity, a lot of the issues surrounding the Biden family too. I think one of the things. So the answer is yes, and it applies to all parties. What I hear from the left is a constant drumbeat of accusation about President Trump, to which I acquiesce in part, but I find them utterly unconcerned with the same sorts of issues rising on their side of the aisle. They see President Trump as the person who's constantly violating the standard, the person who's constantly setting the new standard. And as I've said publicly before, I think President Trump stumbled on the prone body of American politics and said, this is a dead body. I see him much more as the coroner than as the murderer. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some of both, meaning I think things can get worse under President Trump than they were heretofore. And I'm not going to deny that he's done things that I think are bad and wrong. I was very critical of his rhetoric, for example, between the election of 2020 and January 6th. But I do think that to ignore the fact
but
that
were any of these things disqualifying in a moral political sense, like election? January.
Yeah, let's move up. Let's get to some more juicy stuff. Who wants to hear Ben Shapiro talk about conspiracy theories and Candace Owens? Put a 1 in the chat if you want to hear Ben Shapiro's take on conspiracy theories. Oh, wait, actually, was this the same? No, this wasn't the same clip. No, different clip. Don't worry.
And they, instead of saying your school is doing it wrong or you're doing it wrong or they're teaching the wrong thing, they said, well, we're probably doing it wrong. And so probably we need to actually rectify that breach.
Okay, then let's talk about the debate that you're having inside MAGA. You're at the center of a feud that's developing in the conservative movement, and it has to do with anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories related to anti-Semitism. Not long after Charlie Kirk died, you spoke at the Turning Point Conference, America Fest, and you called out Candace Owens and attendees like Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson. These are very influential figures now on the right and the media of the MAGA movement. Talk to me a little bit about this divide, how it's developed, what it's done to your relationships as well inside the MAGA movement.
So, I mean, first of all, as people may suspect, I'm not particularly interested in my sort of personal relationships with others in the political sphere. I have a family that's very tight-knit. I have 4 children going on 5. I have a dog. I have plenty of things going on in my social calendar. And I don't see it as particularly important to hang out with people who are in sort of the same career milieu.
Well, then tell me about your decision to make that speech, and we'll play it.
Sure.
We'll play a clip from it too.
There were 2 speeches that I gave back to back. One was a speech that I gave at the Heritage Foundation the night before, and one was the TPUSA speech that I gave that night. The Heritage Foundation speech was specifically directed at Tucker Carlson because I believe that Tucker Carlson is not a conservative in any real market way that I can identify, and I was pointing that out at the Heritage Foundation.
How would you describe his politics?
Conspiratorial populism. I try not to speculate on motivations of people because I just don't have a window into their head. All I can say is that the stuff that he has been promoting for the past several years is very much in line with the philosophies of people like Alexander Dugin. It is very much
the Russian nationalist philosopher said to be close to at least the thinking of Vladimir Putin.
Yes, his.
But Ben, who do you align with? Whose views are you aligned with? Who's influenced you? Who's your role model?
View of America in the world is a view that is actually closer to Howard Zinn than I think to that of sort of traditional conservatives. This idea that America is a nefarious and terrible force in the world that has committed myriad sins and must withdraw from the world, both for its own good and for the good of the world. His belief that a conspiratorial coterie of people is manipulating American policy. Those people very often happen to have crossover with Jews, according to his guests, that he routinely launders onto the air. In the aftermath of Charlie's death, Candace Owens, in particular, had started speculating openly that people at TPUSA, up to and including in my interpretation, Erica Kirk, Charlie's wife, had been complicit in his murder, or at least complicit in a cover-up of his murder.
Unless it is true that there was a big payday that was on the line, and if Charlie radically stated that he was done with Israel, if Charlie said he had no choice but to abandon the pro-Israel cause because of, and I quote, Jewish donors, the behavior of Jewish donors, if he said that, yes or no, well then, I don't know, maybe some people didn't want to take that risk that he was going to, become Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson?
Her bizarre conspiratorial rantings had been treated as legitimate and worthwhile by people ranging from Tucker Carlson to Megyn Kelly. And so I felt that this was a necessary speech to make about the gap that has emerged on the right between a conspiratorial view of politics promoted by commentators who seem to bear less responsibility for truth-telling than I think they do. And that sort of conspiratorialism has taken over large parts of the Republican Party and the conservative movement.
Were you surprised by?
I'm sorry. I got to play this clip again.
Disinformation. She shared that political article on Twitter, the one that had all these former intelligence officials who are so in the know, and so we should definitely trust them, saying, quote, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say. That's what she tweeted out. So Jen Psaki was asked about this yesterday, given the fact that, again, the New York Times did report it. It was in paragraph 24. I'm not kidding. Paragraph 24 of this long story about Hunter Biden's problems with IRS scrutiny. Finally, it is admitted that this was not, in fact, Russian disinformation, that it was, in fact, real, that the laptop belonged to Hunter Biden, and that he did, in fact, leave it at this Delaware repair shop. Quote, people familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between Biden, Mr. Archer, and others about Burisma and other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. Yeah, so there it is, just buried in paragraph 24. Now, normally what you would assume is that the top headline here would be, New York Times confirms laptop was not Russian disinformation. Instead, the headline from the New York Times was, Hunter Biden paid tax bill, but broad federal investigation continues. It's all unjustified. He's a good guy. He paid back the back taxes that he owed years later after selling his art for $500,000. New York Times covering its butt all the time. So Jen Psaki was asked about.
All right, so Ben Shapiro. So let me get this straight. So back when the big scandal was the Hunter Biden laptop, you were on the side with the conspiracy theorists. The entire administration, everyone in the DOJ and the FBI, the CIA, they were all a bunch of liars. The whole apparatus, you said, they all lied. That's the title of this video. They all lied. And in this scenario, you were on the side with the conspiracy theorist. And now you're sitting here bragging about how you were right and that the conspiracy was true and that everybody lied. And now they're just trying to pass it along, keep it moving. Does anybody else find any irony in that? Just a little. Just a little. Chat, come on, let me know. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Or is Ben Shapiro a really big hypocrite? Because that's what I'm getting out of all this tonight. Is that Ben Shapiro, when the Democrats were in power and the Democrats are doing illegal shit, that he is like the number one conspiracy theorist. And he doesn't trust any of them. But then when they talk about Epstein, and it's Israel and Alan Dershowitz, his former professor, and Lawrence Summers, who was president of the university while he attended. You know, when they're under the microscope, then nobody would ever lie. Then it's just a wild conspiracy theorist. It's a wild conspiracy theory, right? Come on. Come on. Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. Yo, this guy is just so full of shit. He is so full of shit. And like I said, this is the first episode of a series. Where I'm going to keep digging into Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire, his sponsors, his affiliates, and I'm going to show you guys a lot of stuff like this. And a lot of stuff it's already public information, but it's going to have the spotlight on it in a way that it hasn't before. Because the mainstream media, both sides, are completely corrupt. And they don't want you to know this stuff. They don't want you to know this stuff. They don't want you to know about VPN Express and Teddy Saggy. I don't think they want you to know that. They don't want you to know about the other donors. We're going to get into what happened to Andrew Breitbart and Ben Shapiro's time at Breitbart and why Steve Bannon thinks that he's a snake. And we're going to start looking at other patterns. We're going to start looking at other events. We're going to look at times that Ben Shapiro has benefited from the downfalls of other individuals, including Charlie Kirk. And we're going to see what you guys all think about it. Let's get back here.
Candace Owens, I believe, is somebody that you worked with at the Daily Wire.
Yeah, we hired her in 2021.
What did you see in
and then
that?
we fired her in 2023. So in 2021, what we saw was a fairly, I would say, mainstream conservative who said inflammatory things, obviously, and who had been telling us that she
inflammatory things that you liked.
Some that I would say most of them that I liked. Some of them not as much. You know, as people who hired her, we thought that she was going to develop in sort of, intellectual directions. She had said that she was learning with Shelby Steele, for example, and reading the works of Thomas Sowell and all this kind of thing. By 2022, it was apparent that she was moving in another direction, and then it took until 2023 for that direction to come to full fruition.
And what was that?
Anti-Semitism.
What was the direction in 2023? Forgive me.
She was spouting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, among other conspiracy theories, including the idea that Emmanuel Macron's wife is actually a man and all this sort of stuff. And so at that point...
So that was your limit with her?
To be fair, I am not an officer of my company. The people who made that decision were Jeremy Boring and Caleb Robinson, the co-CEOs of the company. But that was the collective management decision, yes.
Now, you specifically criticized Tucker Carlson for a really soft interview he did with a guy named Nick Fuentes, who's, I think it's fair to say, a Nazi apologist.
If you host a Hitler apologist, Nazi-loving, anti-American piece of refuse like Nick Fuentes, if you have that person on your show and you proceed to glaze him, you ought to own it.
You point out how outrageous he is, but is that exactly what Carlson wants in his guest? Just attention?
I mean, I think that probably the attention doesn't hurt, but at the same time, I think that probably there is some ideological overlap between some of the things that he believes about America and the conspiratorial forces controlling it, and some of the stuff that Nick Fuentes believes. What Tucker has a habit of doing is bringing on guests who spout the most conspiratorial form of the theory, and then he sort of buys it back about 5%, and then he allows those views to be predominant in the public discourse while talking about what wonderful people let's
go up a little bit.
Okay, but I get that, sure. And I
right? It's part of a broader conspiracy theory. But one of the things that's happened is in much the same way that the right said for a long time, you keep calling everybody racist, therefore nobody's a racist, which is untrue, right? There are actual racists out there.
There are.
But the idea is that if you over apply a category, then it starts losing its power and its effectiveness, and that actually opens the door to the thing. I think the same thing has happened with anti-Semitism. And so what I've said before is, instead of talking in categories of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred or the rest of it, why don't we talk about what's true and what's false and what's moral and what's not moral? Because that's
Ben,
easier
let
for
me
people
ask
to get
you-
their head around.
I actually totally agree with Ben Shapiro there. Why don't we talk about what's moral and what's not moral, and what's true and what's not true? And let's stop with the pandering. Let's not try to act like the Epstein case is a giant conspiracy theorist because you share some mutual friends with the guy, or shared some mutual friends with the guy, depending on what your opinion is as to whether or not Jeffrey Epstein is still alive today. Like, why don't you own that, Ben? Why don't you own the fact that your ties and your mutual affiliations with Jeffrey Epstein make you a compromised source of interest, that you have conflicts of interest that discredit your opinion? You can't have it both ways. You can't say that with the Hunter Biden laptop case that everyone's a liar and the whole system is corrupt and that they rigged the election. And then all of a sudden, when it's your friends that are under the, or should be under the investigation, or not under the investigation, I should say, you act like the whole thing is a giant conspiracy theorist and start acting like, oh, it's all Jew hate. It's not what it is at all. Individual accountability. And now, after the research that I've done, I think as far as the Jeffrey Epstein case goes, that Ben Shapiro has his own level of individual accountability for how the information he's presenting. The same way that he put it on Pam Bondi and said that she was incompetent for the way that she was telling people about all the thousands of pictures and victims that didn't exist, according to him. I think he needs to take accountability for the flat out lies that he said about the case and his videos about trying to tell us what's real. And now looking at that, how could we find him credible with this whole Charlie Kirk case? Because now we know that he's willing to lie and bury a case if it's in the interests of his friends and former associates. So with that logic in mind, if Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and it is a government conspiracy, we already know that Ben Shapiro would be the first one to come up and lie about it, to cover for his friends. He'd be the first one to interview people and speak highly of them to try to make them look better to the public. Yes or no? I think that that is a really fair assessment based on the actual evidence and what we've seen today. What's on the what is on legal documents, public information, and words that came out of his own mouth. And I'll stand by that.